Hello everybody, and welcome to another epilogue for the video titled Giving Life to the Heirloom, the lovely little painting of a boy, girl, or which one is it? Well, Bob asked, is the subject a boy or a girl? And he said boys were often presented in dresses in the 19th century and earlier. And congratulations, Bob, you were correct. This is a portrait of a little boy. Now, he is wearing a fairly delicate dress, so it leads a lot of us to believe that it was a girl, but in fact, the family informed me that it is a little boy. Now, Jonas asked, it looks like you are not removing all of the old fill-in material. Why is that? Well, good observation, Jonas, and I am not removing all of the fill-in material. Some of it does have to come off because it was standing proud of the surface or because it was over some of the original paint. But we always have to ask ourselves, is there a benefit to removing something just to put it back? That is, if I dig out all of that old fill-in material, well, I'm going to have to put new fill-in material right in its place. And in the process of removing that old fill-in material, I may risk removing some paint or chipping the original paint. So in this case, there really wasn't much to be gained by venturing into a risky process, so I just left it. Now, Jennifer asked another technical question. Did I use the washi kozo on the back of the canvas instead of matching with old canvas to prevent any bumps on the painted layer? Spot on. That's exactly why I used the washi kozo. That canvas, if you remember, was so thin and so threadbare that trying to find a matching weave and weight would be almost impossible. And even if I did, there runs the risk that that slight difference would get transferred from the back to the front, and then I would have a bump on the original paint layer. So I didn't want to take the risk that that happened, so I just used the washi kozo. And if you remember, I lined the painting face down because the painting was really smooth, so any divots would be on the back of the lining canvas as opposed to the face of the painting. Now, Shame Boy asks, when I'm removing the varnish from the background, how can you tell that you've got it all? Well, it's a good question because it seems like magically the varnish comes off and then I stop. It is a combination of using all of my senses. I can hear the varnish get tacky, and I can hear the change when the swab is rubbing on varnish versus the original paint layer. I can smell the solvent breaking down the varnish and when there is no more varnish in the area I'm working. I can also feel the resistance change. Varnish is sticky when it's being removed, and once it's all off, the swab glides fairly smoothly over the surface. And if I have any doubts, I can always take the painting into the dark and look at it under a black light to see if there is any remnants of varnish on the painting. Alexa asked, overpaint. Is this simply the work of a bad conservator, or was there some sort of philosophy in old conservation that it was necessary to do this? It's just bad work. I mean, since the dawn of conservation, the rule has been you only touch up what is missing. It has never been acceptable to overpaint or be excessive in the retouching process. So that is just bad work. Now, on the topic of retouching, Kelly asked, at what point in retouching does the original painting become lost forever? Ooh, that is a really, really good question, and conservators have written white papers about this and argued about this, and I don't think that there will ever be a definitive answer as to when too much retouching has happened to recreate the image and at what point the original is lost. Suffice it to say that there is a line for each painting, for each conservator, and for each client whereby too much work becomes invasive. And that is a different line for a museum versus a private collector versus an auction house versus a dealer. Everybody has their own kind of litmus test about where is too much. And it's the conservator's job, my job, to understand that and meet that expectation and limit that my client sets. So for some clients, recreating a lost part of the face is absolutely paramount. They want that piece put back together. But for other clients, me making the editorial decision about what was there is just a bridge too far, and they would rather I simply tone the area in or just break it up and disguise it. So there is no universal set answer. This isn't a question, but Annalise said, I miss the different font swab counter. I don't. It was way too much work to put, I think it was 77 different fonts onto the video. Oh my gosh, I will never do that again. Unless everybody really, really wants it, and then I'll do it again. Now, Laura asked, with respect to the damage, it almost looks like there are lines on the sides. Did this line up with the stretcher, or was the painting once somehow smaller? Well, good observation. It does line up with the stretcher. You see, those stretcher bars onto which the painting is stretched, they're made of wood. And wood holds onto moisture, so does canvas. But wood holds onto it longer than canvas. And because there's more mass of wood, it holds onto that moisture longer. So the area where the stretcher bar ends and the canvas takes over, well, there is a humidity difference between this area and this area. And so there is going to be an expansion and contraction difference. And so that area where the canvas that is not near the wood meets the canvas that is near the wood, we have a point of tension. And that's often why we see stretcher bar marks around a canvas. Now, the other reason would be if the canvas is loose and floppy, in which case it would hit, if I can actually do this, it would hit the edge of the stretcher bar and create a line. Now, Nikki asks, are there paints that you could use that have a longer open time? She was asking because I mentioned that the paints I use have a very short open time, and so it's really difficult to work with. I'm not really painting in the same sense that an artist does, where they can blend on the canvas and they can rework. And yes, there are additives to the paints, but I find that they change the sheen of the paint, they change the overall handling properties, and I don't really like them. Not to mention, I've been dealing with this issue for over 20 years, so I'm attuned to it. I know how to handle it. When I first started, I was completely confused. I did not understand how to work with these paints, and it was a source of great frustration. But like anything, the more you do it, the more you get used to it, and then it no longer seems like an impediment. Now, Jonas asked, does there ever come a point where the stretcher becomes unusable due to the amount of holes, and what do I do in that situation? Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes the amount of tack holes, nail holes, staple holes, or the fragility of the stretcher is just an impediment to using it again. And the good thing is that it's wood, and we can repair wood. So we can use wood hardeners, wood fillers, all sorts of other products to stabilize and harden that wood. Now, one thing contractors often do when they are dealing with a piece of wood that has a lot of nail holes in it is they will take little toothpicks or golf tees, dip them in glue, hammer them into the hole, and then trim them flush. And then that gives you a new piece of wood into which you can drive a little nail or tack. So picking up a trick from woodworkers and carpenters, always a good day in my book. Now, Jill asked, I was wondering if you added another coat of varnish after I painted in the cracks. No, the cracks were so minute and really so small that it isn't really necessary to add another layer of varnish. On top of which, I didn't really want to disturb the varnish that I had laid down. I thought it was a really great sheen, and I just didn't want to risk messing it up, having to remove it, having to remove the cracks, because remember they're on top of the varnish, and then kind of do it all over again. Now, if the paint I was adding was a light color, then maybe there would be impetus to putting on another layer of varnish, just in case it changed a little bit. But this was dark brownish, blackish, so if it darkened, well, it's just gonna look like cracks. So in this case, I was lucky I could get away with not having to add another layer of varnish. And Callista asks, here's something I've always wondered. You say applying the resin barrier before you start restoration work can help you match your colors to the original work because the resin deepens and enriches the original colors on the canvas the same way the varnish will later. So you're working with the, quote, final colors available to you, rather than guessing how they'll be transformed by the varnish once it's applied, right? But wouldn't the varnish have the same effect on your colors? That's a really, really good question, and one that I myself asked my father when he told me to put down an isolation layer. I didn't understand it because I said, well, the colors are going to change when we put down the final varnish. Yes, they do. But if you notice, when I'm retouching and the paint is wet, it is darker and richer. And when it is wet, that's what it's going to look like when I add the final varnish. So when I apply the paint to the surface of the painting and it's wet and it matches, I'm satisfied. Now as it dries, the paint gets lighter. And so if we go back and look at the painting after all of the retouching's been applied, we will see areas that are just one shade, maybe two shades lighter than the surrounding colors. And that is what confused me when I was younger. But then when we apply the final varnish, it resaturates the retouching colors so that they rematch the original like they did when they were wet. Does that make sense? I know it sounds kind of convoluted, but if you think about it, I think it makes sense. Anyhow, if it doesn't, leave me a comment and I'll try to find a better analogy or a better example. As always, I really enjoyed this video. I enjoyed seeing your questions. They're getting much, much more clever and much more insightful and pointed. And I love that because as you folks are getting to know more about conservation and me and the way I work, you're asking really pointed questions that actually cause me sometimes to think about why I'm doing things and for what reason, and also allow me to clarify in my head sometimes things that I have known or been doing for decades but haven't had to voice them. And so your pointed questions actually make me a better conservator. So, thanks.